Hello everyone and welcome to the finals of the US Chess Championship 2021. It's Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley So, and this is only the first game of the tiebreaks that we are going to check out. It's a three-way tiebreak between Fabiano Caruana, Wesley So, and Samuel Sevian. So first it's Fabi versus Wesley, then it's I think Wesley versus Sevian, and then Fabi versus Sevian. Or it could be the other way around in the second and third match. But we'll see what happens. So this is the first one, already completely crazy game. You guys are gonna enjoy it. Let's check it out. Fabi with the white pieces opens with c4. He goes for the English opening. Knight to f6 by Wesley, knight to c3, and now e5. So the standard stuff. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, the four knights of the English, and now e4. Grabbing more space in the center, gaining nice control of the d5 square, and now bishop to b4. Going for the Nimzovich variation. We have d3, adding more support to the center, and black does the same. We have d6, and now a3. Challenging Wesley's bishop here, so bishop back to c5, and now Fabi doesn't want to take any chances, and he goes for b4 right away. Further expands his pawn chain on the queen side, attacks the bishop, and bishop back to b6 by Wesley. We have bishop to e3, and here Wesley castles. We have bishop to e2, and now there is a game where bishop to g4 was played, but here we have the immediate bishop captures on e3, and it is now only as of move 9 that we have a completely new game. There is, like I always mention, more than one database, and there are some other games that reach further positions, but I don't have access to all of them. So bishop captures on e3, a completely new game. We have f captures on e3. Now you have double d pawns, but you have the semi-open file for your rook here on the f file. And also, if, for example, something like knight e7, knight g6, you will have a very nice control of the f4 square. Plus, you will have additional support for d4 if you'll ever need it. So knight to e7, Wesley goes for this knight maneuver, castles, and now queen to d2. Knight to g6 and queen to d2. Fabi connects the rooks, and now rook to e8. And there are databases that say that rook to e8 now is a completely new move, but I'm sticking with the one that I usually use. So rook 8 to e1, activating the other rook as well, and now a5. As this rook left to the a file, we want to now attack this pawn chain and then maybe use the semi-open a file for our rook at some point. So b5 by Fabi, he prefers to keep it closed, and now c6, challenging this b5 pawn. We have bishop to d1. Now the bishop can be shifted to c2 on this diagonal, or maybe even to b3 to this diagonal if needed. And now the rook also has very nice control of the e file. So h6 by Wesley, and d4 now by Fabi. The e4 pawn is nicely defended, so of course he wants to make some progress in the center. We have queen to e7. Wesley continues development, and the bishop to c2 now. So now this knight can move. The e4 pawn is also very nicely protected. So bishop to d7, and now Fabi goes for d5. And this is something very, very enjoyable, as you'll see. C captures on b5, C captures on b5, and now rook e to c8, putting some pressure along the c file, as many pieces are here. So if the queen ever moves, or if the queen is forced to move, there could be some problems. So bishop to d3, Fabi gets one of the pieces out of the way, also puts more defense to the b5 pawn, and now a4, not allowing Fabi to consolidate with a4 himself. We have queen to b2, preparing queen to b4, as this d6 pawn is a little bit weak, but also we're thinking about bringing this knight to d2, then to c4, and then hopefully to b6 to do maximum damage. While the black knights here aren't really doing all that much, there's not a lot of plans you can come up with for those knights, and it's all thanks to this e3 pawn. Black might at some point attack it with knight to g4, but not as long as this rook is on e1. So queen to d8, and now queen to b4. We have queen to a5, forcing a queen trade, as Fabi is controlling a lot more space. This is what you want to do in such situations, and here the queen trade is forced. If you can't really move the queen, the knight would hang. That's not the correct arrow. The knight would hang. So queen captures on a5. We have rook captures on a5, and now rook to c1, defending our knight and getting the rook to the only open file on the board. But now rook goes back. We have rook 8 to a8, and now knight to a2. Like I said, you could also go for knight to d4, knight to d2, knight to c4, and then try to go for b6. But Fabi first decides to go for this knight to a2 maneuver. We have knight to g4. Now the rook moved, so of course the e3 pawn is hanging, and here they're about down to 5 minutes each. I think Wesley was around 5 minutes and 40 seconds, Fabi down to 5 minutes. as this is a rapid game. And now rook f to e1. Now this rook defends the e pawn, and now you might go for something like rook captures on c1, thinking, okay, white will now have to capture with the knight, but white will gladly capture with the rook. And now if you go for this grab, then we're gonna play g3. We're gonna prevent this knight from coming into the game, and now we're threatening rook to c7. And it doesn't matter, even if you trade rooks off the board, captures, knight to c3 now goes after the a4 pawn, and then you will have two pawns on the queen side. You're gonna push this one, create a passed pawn, and hopefully win the game this way. So this would be good for white. So Wesley instead goes king f8. You want to improve the position of your king, as we are kind of in the end game. Knight to b4 now, and here comes king to e8. Again, you could consider rook captures on c1 now, because the knight moved from a2, so it's much further away from this a4 pawn. For example, rook captures, rook c8, and even if we trade captures, now this is very much different than if the knight could just attack the a4 pawn right away. So instead, we have a king to e8. Wesley just continues improving the position of the king, and now h3. We want to get rid of this knight here because it's really a nuisance. So knight back to f6, and only now knight to d2. We have king to e7 by Wesley, and now Fabi went into a thing here, which spends time, and time is of the essence here. We are in a rapid game below 5 minutes each, and he decided to go for this knight to c4 move. He had to calculate whether bishop captures on b5 was acceptable for him, and it is. If black goes for bishop captures on b5, we're going to play knight b6, put pressure on both of the rooks, and then after rook captures, now we are controlling the c8 square, so and the entire c file. The rook is attacked, so you'd have to move the rook somewhere, then rook to c7 check, and white has an excellent position. So Wesley does not go for this bishop captures on b5. He instead goes for rook to c5, but now Fabi gets this amazing idea of knight to b6, attacking the rook and the bishop here. We have rook to a5, getting the rook out of harm's way, now putting pressure on the b5 pawn, and now Fabi has a really awesome move that you guys should really figure out for yourselves. Feel free to pause the video and try to find this incredible move for Fabi while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this brilliancy, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight to c6 with check. Or you could prepare it like Fabi did in the game with rook captures on c5. Doesn't matter what order you choose. So d captures on c5 was played in the game. Congratulations to everyone who found this. You are a true master of spotting brilliancies in rapid games. Knight to c6 check. Now you have to accept the sacrifice, because otherwise you're just losing a rook here. The rook on a5 is unguarded. So b captures, and now b captures. And now Fabi has this beautiful pass pawn here. It's ready to go to c7 to c8, and Wesley has to figure out how to do it. You could play king to d8 and try and stop the pawn this way, but at some point it's very likely that you will have to give up at least one piece for those passed pawns. So here Wesley does it right away. We have bishop captures on c6, and here Wesley was down to some 4 minutes, but Fabi was down to a minute and a half. So Fabi really has to play fast here. D captures on c6 was played, now threatening to just win the game. King to d8, stopping c7, and now Fabi has to figure out how to continue playing this. Now this is a completely superior position for white, and you have to play something like rook to b1. Point of it all is that if black plays something like knight to e7, which is really black's only active plan to eliminate this pawn, because the pawn cannot advance to c7, you have knight to c4, attacking the rook, and once the rook moves, now you can pick up the e5 pawn, defending the c6 pawn, and this is how white should prevail. However, after king to d8, we have knight to d5 by Fabi, thinking that, okay, this must be even better, because if black captures, I just improve my position in the center, but things aren't always so black and white in chess. So here knight captures on d5, e captures now with two connected passed pawns, but now knight to e7. Now Wesley wants to play knight c8 and knight to d6 and create a blockade with the knight, and the knight is a remarkable blockading piece. So e4, defending this pawn, and now knight to c8. We have rook to b1 now by Fabi, but now knight to d6. Now saying that rook to c8, rook to b8, I really don't care. If you play rook to b8 check, I'm going to play king to c7, and do your thing. You can go after my pawns here. Okay, this pawn is defended, and if you go after this pawn, it's really not a problem. I'm just gonna start pushing my pass pawn, and then it's gonna be real trouble. However, after this knight to d6 move, Fabi played king to f2, and this is now a problem. You could also consider g4, because controlling the f5 square really makes sense. You do not want to allow something like f5, but Fabi started with king to f2. He wants to improve the position of his king, and now we have c4 by Wesley, bishop to c2, and now f5. And now you can already sense that black is now better here. King to e3, and now we have king to c7. So now rook to b8 is no longer even an option. Rook to b4 by Fabi going after the pawns here, but now f captures on e4. We have bishop captures on e4, and now c3, advancing this pass pawn. And now it's very, very dangerous. You can play rook to c5, you can capture the bishop, you can start pushing the c pawn, so Fabi has to be extremely careful here, and a move like king to d3 still keeps him in the game. However, he played bishop to c2, and this just makes white's position fall apart. He blunders the d5 pawn. Okay, doesn't blunder it, he captures on a4, but now the position is completely winning for black. And not only that, here Fabi had 1 second on the clock, and he captured on a4, and as he was hitting the clock, before he hit the clock, that 1 second on his clock ran out, and he was in this position on move 46 that Fabi resigned the game, but not really resigned, but actually he lost on time. Brilliant game by both of them. Brilliant by Wesley for just keeping in there and surviving such an attack, for finding a nice counterattack, for playing faster than Fabi. And then after all the dust settled, Fabi was just left with a few seconds on the clock, whereas Wesley had some 4 minutes, I think maybe 3.5. But all in all, an excellent tiebreaker game of the US Chess Championship 2021. So we'll see what happens in the other games. Now Wesley still has to face Samuel Savian, and Fabi will also face Samuel Savian, so we'll see what happens after all 3 rounds have ended. That's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Really a wild one. Rapid chess is always much more bloodier than classical, so hope you enjoyed that as well. I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Danush, and I would like to thank Jonathan Turak, Charles Curran, David Farney, and Tom Deralo for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the US Chess Championship tiebreaks. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.